Hey everybody, this is Greg Barron again. Thanks for joining our YouTube channel. Today I am joined in the studio with none other than Casey Mesner, our Director of Marketing and resident bad A of everything social media. Thanks for joining us, Casey. And today we're going to talk about 5 things I don't do when investing in real estate, and you're going to want to stay tuned to the very end.
Okay, well, let's go back to due diligence. We heard you talk about the mistakes you've made. What do you do now?
Let me make it easy for the listeners, and let's just go exterior and interior. And I'm talking about the physical plant now. So the exterior, I'm going to do basically a couple of major things. I'm going to look at the structural systems to see if they're intact. I'm going to look at the roof, and I'm going to check all the HVAC units or the heating and air conditioning units. And a lot of times if it's large enough, and especially the larger commercial facilities, but for the sake of this video, let's just say it's a residential facility, I'm going to bring in a third-party consultant to tell me the existing life that's left on HVAC units. And I'm also going to have somebody climb up on the roof, which, by the way, a lot of people don't want to do that are doing due diligence, but I'm going to go up there and see where we are in the lifespan of that roof, because both of those things are very big ticket items. And I'll say this too, that's commercial or residential. And a lot of people overlook the finer details. When I get inside, I do the same due diligence checklist on all the interior finishes. I'm looking at the appliances. If it's commercial, I'm looking at the equipment. I'm looking at the expected life of the finishes that we have, those sort of things. So we spend a lot of time in a forensic exercise because we have to set aside reserves, which we'll probably get to a little bit later, because we know those things are going to affect our operating income down the road.
So what you're saying is you kind of start with yourself, make sure you're not getting emotional, and then you go into the actual property itself, looking at the exterior, the interior, and all the while you've got a checklist, making sure you're making the right decisions.
Always franchise what you're going to do. Always run it like a business. And yeah, franchise businesses always have a checklist to make sure they're processing the same thing over and over each time. And a lot of times it's made them successful in the past, so it'll make them successful in the future. So the third thing that I do now is I don't overlook solid financial modeling and financial planning. Hey, once again, as always, if you're enjoying the video, be sure and like and subscribe.
Okay, Greg, I know you're a numbers guy. How do you specifically do this?
Well, at this point, I'm assuming that I have a contract on something or I'm approaching a contract. So you will take all the existing information, and brokers are great about giving you a flowery brochure on the product, but I take those figures then, and then I deep dive a little further or a lot further and verify those numbers. And a lot of the brokers I've dealt with several times, I trust, but I verify. So then I jump into what's near and dear to my heart, which is, our software, which allows us to do sensitivity analysis and financial modeling. I will tell you over and over again, if you don't do financial modeling and great financial planning, you are setting yourselves up for a potential failure in the future.
So can you apply the same principles to a small deal as well as a big deal?
Yeah, obviously there's complexities the larger you get. But you have to educate yourselves on the solid terminology of things that are going to make you successful even at the beginning.
So is there one particular area that people tend to overlook when they're doing financial modeling?
Yeah, and by the way, financial modeling is a big word, and it sounds like you have to have an MBA to do it. But for the sake of the video, I think financial planning or financial modeling, if you get into more complicated areas, is what we're aiming for. But yeah, I think the one thing that people fail to do is fully recognize a potential reserve that they need to have for operating expenses. That's the one thing where it goes along with doing due diligence. You could still buy a property, but if you've only got 5 years left on a useful life on your roof or an HVAC system, you need to put money in an operating reserve, knowing that you're going to come out of pocket. People tend to be too optimistic when they're purchasing property, and they don't effectively insert these potential expenses in the future that everybody that's been in it for a while knows it's going to happen. So that level of education is essential in the don'ts. So don't neglect proper financial planning and proper financial modeling.
And that goes back to don't get emotional. Being too optimistic is emotional. You're not looking at all the things that could go wrong.
Usually it is somebody who's over optimistic. I want the deal. I don't want to put that in there because if I do, it's not going to make, or it's not going to hit the marks that the banks want to see if I'm going to put any debt on it at all. So yeah, I mean, we're all guilty of being over optimistic in deals. So number 4 in the list is never fail, or in this case, don't fail to confirm OPEX, or as we call operational costs, in your due diligence.
Could you give us some examples of what operating costs are?
Sure. Now, this goes back to my very good friends, the brokers who bring deals to me. I love them, but I verify. So in this case, I'm going to take their initial figures, but then I'm going to drill down in rent rolls, insurance, property taxes, and also in operating costs. If it's a larger deal, I'm going to understand that inflation is going to be a factor too. So in confirming OPEX or operating costs, I always take the figures as they're given to me, but then I go back in and, as a good accountant or finance person would do, I align those with actual receipts so that I can verify what's actually there is a real number.
Okay, so let me break this down. Are you saying that the information you're given from the broker potentially could not be accurate because they've got skin in the game?
Well, sure. I mean, I love my brokers and I love my real estate agents. I got some as family. I got some as best friends. But they can suffer from the disease of optimism just as equally as we do trying to buy it. So there's a lot of things in the process that I take, but I also want to verify. Specifically, those things that are big items are property insurance. I get my own quotes. I also do my own due diligence on property taxes to make sure it's correct, and then have a realistic view of what the operating expenses will be moving forward. And let's face it, I'm going to have an inflationary adjustment for those costs because, as we all know, we've been living in a time of inflation. So every year I'm going to have at least 3 to 5% adjustments just for inflation.
So Greg, do you consider inflation part of your operating costs? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's not necessarily a tangible cost, but it's definitely a variable cost that I want to account for. I mean, let's face it, the Fed right now has said that they want to get it to 2%, so it's at least 2%. I always use 3 to 4% as an inflationary adjustment for my operating cost. They will go up. And alternatively, that's what makes real estate a great deal, is because hopefully the value of real estate goes up. But as we tie a bow on operating cost and doing the forensics on that, just make sure that you don't get too optimistic, or as I like to say, suffer from the disease of optimism in trying to forecast operating expenses.
All right, so that's number 4. Let's move into number 5. What's your number 5 don't?
Well, number 5 ties in with number 1 on getting too emotional. Sometimes we over-anticipate what appreciation will do to our asset. So number 5 is don't rely on appreciation to value your asset.
So wait, so you're saying don't rely on appreciation? I thought that was the whole reason people invest in real estate.
No, that's a great question. Don't get me wrong. I anticipate appreciation, and that's the reason I'm in the game. But to purchase a property solely upon the fact that you think it's going to appreciate and you factor that into your decision-making process for purchasing it is not a good business decision. What I will say is I go back to cash flow. I look at the fundamentals of the project going in. Appreciation is the icing on the cake. Appreciation is the reason that it has been such a good asset for me over the years. But it has to cash flow first on basic fundamentals. So look what's happened recently. A lot of people have relied on higher valuations, but yet now their cap rate has increased, which has decreased the value of their properties, and now they're not cash flowing. So for me, in a conservative environment, but in a wealth building environment, I don't want to over rely on appreciation. I do want to look at it on a cash flow basis.
Want to hear more from Greg? Go ahead and drop in the comments what you think the next video should be. We'd also like to hear from you guys. What are some things in your experience that you now don't do? Drop them in the comments so other people can see it.
As always, thanks again for joining us, and remember, educate, evaluate, so you can ultimately execute to increase your own personal wealth. See you soon.